Hello, Women in Tech and Women in Tech supporters, and welcome to Beta in Real Talks. My name is Carly.
And I'm Adriana, and we are your hosts and the creators of Beta, the fictional series about how two very different women learn to empower each other and lead in the tech industry.
And to support the larger dialogues on women's empowerment in tech and highlight the importance of representation in both entertainment and technology, two industries that are designing our future, we started a show called #Beta in Real Talks with the Center of Creative Entrepreneurship here in Chicago, a talk show where women talk to women about their journey in the industry and how to empower more women to lead in tech.
This week, we're very excited to bring you two tech superstars, and we will be real talking with Heather King and Allison Johnson about their journeys and how they rose together in tech. But before we bring them out, we want to introduce you to the two fictional characters, Delta and Leanie, that were inspired by the powerhouse women like our guest today. So please enjoy our trailer for Beta, and we will be back in just a moment.
Oh my God, I hate my job. Just tell them that.
You got me fired.
You got me fired.
You got me fired.
Are you kidding me?
That's me, Leanie. This is Delta. She was my boss.
You're good. You're good.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think you should be an entrepreneur.
Leanie, do you know what that word means?
I know this is something you've always wanted. Now's the time. And the tech industry is all the rage right now.
80% of businesses fail within the first 18 months.
This is gonna be so exciting.
You are brilliant.
I am?
Yes.
What did I say?
I don't want you getting involved in my personal life. You know nothing about me.
I'm your friend.
We are not friends.
A flower never competes with a flower beside it. It just blooms.
What about goggles that recognize images?
Like Google goggles?
Exactly. Oh, I see why that's a problem.
I never realized that we were so much on the same page.
We're totally in the same boat.
So we're going worldwide, baby.
Delta, I was gonna show you that we could.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you
We
both for being here. We're super excited for this talk. We've been looking forward to it and counting down to it since you said yes. So.
Pretty much. Before we jump into the talk, though, we just wanted to let everyone know that's watching that if you do have questions, there will be time to answer them at the end. So go ahead and put them onto the chat in whether that's YouTube or Facebook, and we will address them soon.
Amazing. So we wanted to let you both do yourselves some justice and give us a little introduction. Tell us who you are and say hello.
Go ahead, you start, Heather.
First of all, this is super fun to be with Allison on your show. Thanks so much for inviting us. We have known each other a very long time. We started our careers together. My name is Heather King, and I'm currently at Salesforce, running their partnership program with the management consulting firms. I've been in tech for over 25 years, starting at Apple Computer on the original Mac launch team.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm Allison Johnson, and the reason I wanted to get into tech is because I met this super cool woman named Heather King, who was at Apple, and I was like, it was a really interesting, it was the point at which technology was clearly this super hyper growth, change the world kind of industry, and then I was seeing really smart, cool people like Heather going into the business, and I was like, you know what, I want to go there. So yeah, that's how I got in. Her.
That's great. Oh, and where did you guys originally meet? Where was first contact?
Through Apple.
At Apple.
Oh, yeah. It was through Apple.
It was a little bit. Star was starting to rise, and it was a very maverick culture. It attracted really interesting people who were highly creative and wanted to be part of. We weren't quite sure what we were inventing. Like seriously, we weren't quite sure, but we knew we were on something big. and it was, mostly folks in their 20s. And we had almost as much fun as you guys in the flyer, sometimes occasionally more.
Can't wait to hear about that.
It's so cool that this many years later that you're both still connected. 'Cause I often think about if every woman or mentor that I've looked up to in my life that inspired me to take a path knew that. I try to tell them, but some people it's been years, but you don't always get the fortune of being able to stay connected. So it's really cool to have that background.
Yes. Well, before we go into how, like, your superstar background, if we could just kind of humanize a little bit, and if you could tell us where the stories, we like to hear, like, as we talk about the importance of stories and how we develop as people and how they shape who we are and they shape our culture, what stories most impacted you growing up? Before you were the superstars in tech, where did it start? What had a big impact on you?
Heather, you want to start?
I have to say possibly the biggest story or the biggest person that had an impact on me was my dad. And my dad raised me long before Title IX. He was a larger-than-life character, very athletic, successful in business, and he had 2 daughters, and he raised us in that almost like sons before it was sort of about to do so. So he had me out there throwing baseballs at me, having me ski down on icy ski hills, never allowed to go inside to take a break. So there was a certain amount of resilience, toughness, determination that was seeded early on, and also a comfort level with just playing on any playing field.
So important.
I wonder if that's true of women of our generation in business, because my influence, I would have to say, big influence was Dad too, and we would have the dinner table conversations where he would kind of dissect his day. And, he was in sales and marketing at Bethlehem Steel Corporation back in the day, in the big steel era, right? And so we would, he would share stories about what, life in corporate culture was like, and the good and the bad. And that really had an impact on me. I was like, okay, I have to climb the corporate ladder, patriarchal point of view of the world. We'll talk about that more, I'm sure, as we go here. But yeah, Dad was a huge influence, and it was really important to me, I think, in starting out career-wise. I wanted to demonstrate to him that I could do that too. So, yeah.
So great that both of you had father. Yeah, I mean, we all do, but it just goes to show you the importance of the men in our life too, that create space and allow, encourage.
Yeah.
I know. I'm sitting here having my heart's like thinking about my dad and thinking, I've always thought about the stories, the fictional stories or the books I read. And it's true. My parent, I'm very close to my mom, but, my dad had a special place. And every day before I left my house, my dad would grab my chin and say, you got to keep looking up no matter what the world does to make you do this. And he would always, and I'd be like, Dad, let go of my chin. But now in adulthood, it just everything to me.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting now at this point in life to think about how our parents had that kind of impact on us. And I think more broadly of like the people who didn't have the benefit of what Allison and I had in terms of a father who trained us, set that kind of example, believed in us. And so how do we create that kind of context for a much broader set of people? I mean, that's another issue, but I think I'm spending time thinking about it. Yeah,
definitely.
Right.
Very important. When it's not at home, then where do you get it?
Yeah.
What should we go into? Adria, you want to take us into the next?
Yeah, sure. So I was going to say, so from Dad being a mentor and someone you looked to, but not necessarily. Neither of you sound like you're saying that your father was in tech, in business. But what led you to? I know this is a big question, a big answer, but what led you to the tech space?
Yeah.
What was attractive to you? Allison, you want to jump off?
Yeah, sure. As I said, I think it's definitely it was the growth industry at the time. It still is in many respects, and it was the place that you wanted to be because you were changing the world. And I like I said, Heather was a big influence at the time. She had just joined Apple, and the prospect of joining a really cool young company with women like that in it was interesting to me. And then I just stayed in it. And we'll talk as we go here about why and kind of the interesting way that I navigated my technology career. But I want to give Heather a chance to talk about why tech.
My turn?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. My journey to tech was not much as I tend to say I started my career in tech, was not a straight line. I actually had a chapter in investment banking prior to Apple and prior to business school. I every day got up and put on bow tie and pantyhose that I ran every day. I was the only woman in the office that was not a secretary. And yet through that experience, I learned a couple things. First of all, that I did not want to be a banker. Second, that the deals that we were working with, actually I was in San Francisco office and we were starting to work with many of the early Silicon Valley based companies. And I thought, hey, those guys don't have to wear a suit or a bow tie, and they're doing really interesting things. And I want to play in that sandbox, not the sandbox I'm in. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to business school to help me pivot. In business school, I actually did a case study with the Center for Design, Industrial Design in Boston. And I did a study on how Steve Jobs invented the Macintosh from the outside in. And it was through that experience that I got to know a lot of the folks at Apple, and I got a job there without ever having to go through sort of the normal processes. So initially it was a bit of a, rocky start, not in tech, and then I landed in the right place at Apple.
I love that. And I can't help but think, stepping back for just a second to Allison talking about Heather meeting you and why she was attracted to tech. It just validates so much the importance of stories. So if we don't have those leaders in our home, in our close lives and relationships, why we need them on mainstream television. And why Carly and I hope that Dotsa and Lini, in making Beta, the series, can serve as those types of characters that young women can look to and say, that is cool. And I love that. And I want to do that. And I can do that because there's someone like me who's doing it. So,
I would add that one of the, when you said, early stories, early influences, I have to say, this is really super dating myself, but that Marlo Thomas, That Girl story was an amazing story, an empowering story for young women at the time, right? And that was another one that was like, so you're right, television characters, and the fact that you complement that with real talk, right? I think is super interesting and super important.
Yeah. The entertainment part and the stories, the fictional stories, are the subconscious seeds, right? It's just kind of subconsciously what we see mirrored around us. Still, the most impact is always in the home, but it is interesting to see. And I know both of you also have media journalism communications backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
So I found that super interesting in going through your background and as we get more into kind of the rewriting of narratives that need to be happening now. How has your background in media and journalism, how does that influence the work that you do? If it, when you think of it on the marketing side or from developing relationships, how has that kind of impacted your perspective, if at all?
Heather, you want to go?
There, you lead.
All right. Well, it is all about storytelling. And I think, in the context of my role in technology and sort of the unique role that I made for myself is that storytelling translator of technology to consumers, a translator of technology to businesses. And I think that, especially in these really heavily engineering driven cultures, narrative, storytelling, really understanding the customer, was challenging. And that was something that I could do. I could bridge left brain, right brain, and help to develop narratives that I think, were challenging for other folks inside the company to do. And so that storytelling capability, I think, actually uniquely is what has contributed to my career. Yeah.
Absolutely. Heather, anything to add?
Yeah. So my journey into media was, if I look back on my career, there are certain chapters that were very much on purpose, and others that were more by accident or opportunistic. And my journey into media, I had just been with a digitalphotography.com, that was, we became actually part of the Apple solution. And I was recruited off of that by an interesting guy who directed a number of global photo documentary projects to become a producer there. We were working with a number of corporate sponsorships. And the name of the series is called Day in the Life of Africa. It was the 15th in a Day in Life series. And it was a three-legged stool. We had corporate partners that helped underwrite the cost of the project. We hired 100 plus of the world's rock star photojournalists, and we partnered with various significant nonprofits to channel a lot of the proceeds in support of their cause. In this case, it was a Harvard AIDS education nonprofit. And through, the light bulb went on, and just getting involved with that project, I thought, this looks, feels, and smells a lot like a marketing project, a lot like a marketing strategy project, and how incredibly powerful that we've got this kind of platform to broadcast a message and to raise money. So I followed that vein for a while, both in the world of photojournalism, Project Around Africa, Project Around Oceans, and then subsequently I produced not a photo intensive, but a international blog series that looked at how companies can play a significant role in advancing sustainability. So that was in the early days before sustainability was big. So my purpose in channeling into media was much more of a, how do I use this media channel to help advance certain things that I believe in? And I felt that there was a lot of parallel between how you approach that and how you approach any kind of marketing problem.
Definitely. Great.
That's fascinating. I mean, from dissecting.
It was a great chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, from dissecting a Macintosh design system to that, it just sounds like you have quite the journey through, as you said, zigzag, which I think is important for anyone up and coming to know that the path is not always a straight path, and there's not the right answer.
Oh yeah.
I think people coming out of school or even going in school, I knew I was very confused. I thought I could be, a couple specific things, because I was like, I could be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, because people tell you how to do that. But when you're looking at entrepreneurship and tech and innovation, the path is so all over the place. Sometimes movement is the most important. And I think both of you have great examples of your background and journey of networking with people, looking for change, challenging yourself, continuing your own growth is important.
Yeah. 100%. And as we move into some of these topics on alpha and beta and changing cultural stories and all this fun stuff, what I love that both of you so fully embody also is using business as a tool, as an opportunity to make these changes, and that business can be oftentimes there's a strong narrative that we can't change certain practices, or certain businesses are the enemy. And the truth is, when we work within them, it can actually create so much change. And so much of our lives are dominated by the business world. So should we go into alpha?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So we talk a lot, or we've brought up many times in these beta conversations, and the purpose for this story is talking about old school alpha culture. What is it? What has been your experience with it, the good and the not so great?
Okay. Heather,
Allison.
you want me to go? All right, all right. Well, I mean, this is well understood, right? The patriarchal power structures that represent corporations were built by men, and as such, success, right, is defined by things like title and how big your paycheck is and how big your organization is, right? And these are essentially, super ego-driven, aggressive kinds of cultures. And for women, it goes beyond that, right? To us, things like meaning and contribution and impact are also incredibly important attributes of the kind of how we define success. And so, what happens in cultures where that is not rewarded or recognized is we'll tend to withdraw. We'll tend to, we think we're not being heard, and we're probably not being heard. And as a result, we tend to leave, and the stats are not good. Something like 41% of women who are in technology eventually leave, compared to 17% for men. So these old power structures are not places where we can thrive or acknowledge, we can bring our whole self. And so that needs to change.
And I would add two things there. I think, first of all, I think the good news is it is starting to change. I mean, change is glacial, but compared to showing up when I first started in an office, having to look like a man and dress like a man and pay a fortune in pantyhose, we don't have to do that anymore. We can wear what we want and be what we want. Thank God. But I think the other thing about women leaving the tech workforce, and many workforces that are sort of originally male dominated, is that parenting is still sort of an unsolved thing. It's shifting somewhat but it still falls largely in the court of the women. Organizations are starting to implement better policies to enable women to work through. Couples are changing. They're doing more sharing of the roles at home. I see much more kind of how do we juggle this, rather than this is in your camp and mine. So I think it's starting to shift, but I think 20% of those women left the workforce to take a leave, which is often code for I've got to go have kids. Mm-hmm. The trick is that I think many do so without thinking, where is it going to put them at the back end of that shoe? And so one of the interesting ways in which Allison's and my pathways and choices has differed is she stayed on the sort of super fast track throughout her whole career. And I took a decade off to be the primary caregiver for my kids. I did continue to keep an oar in the water the whole way through, thankfully. But the journey of coming at the back end of that and trying to get back in a material way was not the easiest journey.
Definitely.
Do either of you have specific moments or stories about when you started thinking about having children and having to make that decision, and the culture around you, how they reacted to it, or pressures that you felt or didn't feel?
I would say at the time that I made the decision, I knew I wanted to have kids, and I was 32 at the point at which I had my daughter, my first child, and but I was also in the steep part of my climb, my professional climb, and so I did the thing where I took the minimal amount of time off. I did 4 weeks. Came back full throttle, had nannies, had babysitters, all those things, and didn't want to, wanted to make sure that having a kid wasn't going to get in the way of career, and you know, and stayed on a pretty steep climb for baby number 2. And to the point at which, you know, my husband decided, you know, my daughter was turning 9. We had all the live-in nannies, every kind of nanny situation you can imagine, which is incredibly stressful. But by the time she turned 9, you know, we both had crazy careers. And he came home from a trip one time and was reviewing her homework. And it wasn't where it needed to be. And so he said, you know what? This isn't working for us. And so how would you feel if I stayed home? So he was pretty pioneering at the time. He made the decision to stay home. And that created a huge amount of relief for all of us in the family. And I continue to focus on career. And, you know, that was a really tough decision for him at the time, because he was really the only man, you know, going to the PTA meetings and showing up at soccer practice and all those things. And so, you know, it was a decision that we made, a choice that we made. And there are moments in, you know, Heather and I were talking about this the other day as we were kind of reminiscing, as like my daughter ties her shoes like her nanny, not like me. So every time she ties her shoes, it makes me wince because I know I didn't teach her, you know, so there were definitely sacrifices in that journey and regrets in that journey. But they're choices that we made. And you know, I wouldn't change those decisions now.
And I'm sure she looks to you as one day she will. One day, if she sounds like she's a teenager right now, so who knows where teenagers' minds are? But I'm sure she looks to you as the mom superhero who I want to be like mom. Mom should do it.
You know, I think she's actually she passed the point of, oh, there's no way I want to be like her, to, oh my God, I am like her. What do I do about it?
Oh, that moment.
Yeah, that moment.
Becoming my mother.
I'm becoming my mother.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And Heather, anything? Yeah.
Actually, I think Allison's remarks about her partner Ron and their decision, they were really the exception to the rule back then. I mean, it was really expected that when you had kids, you stepped off the wheel, and that's what most of our peers were doing. And I remember having a conversation when I was pregnant with my first with our head of HR, and they said something to me that I think today would be illegal. You know, I was trying to figure out vesting schedules, whatever, and he basically said, "Well, you're not coming back anyhow." And I don't. It clearly, I mean, it's just there weren't the laws against that back then. But when you know, for me, I think it was maybe a little less of a fully informed decision. It was more following a pathway that I felt was expected. I have to admit that while Allison might regret how her daughter ties her shoes, there were times that I also regretted, like, gosh, you know, I feel like a thoroughbred put out to pasture. I mean, my friend Allison is like rocking it, you know, running this company, and I'm driving carpool. So it's, I think either path, whatever you choose, you have to choose what's right for you at the time, right for you and your partner. You have to know that it's not going to last forever, that it is a precious time. And that you have to know that you're always going to have regrets either which way, that it's give up something. You can do everything, but you can't do it all at once.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And on this, you know, as we talk to, I mean, we know the importance of parents, moms and dads, right? Having to be, I mean, I don't remember my dad growing up. I mean, I remember my dad, like I was very close. I wanted to go to work with him all the time, but he was gone all the time. And, you know, and that was a relationship that we missed, we built later in life. But, you know, so it's important for both parents. And it's also important as we look at innovation and what is being built in our policy making, that women are included. I would just love to hear both of you also speak to the importance of having women in these roles right now. Yeah. And why, like how it changes how a business is run and what is created.
Yeah. Well, I think we know what superpowers we bring, right? So relatability, compassion, empathy, collaboration, the ability to negotiate, the difference between a win-win, which is how we like to approach things, versus
Yes.
win-lose. And I do think that as more and more women come into leadership roles, and you're absolutely right, it is vitally important, especially as we bring the new generations into the workforce. This is what they're going to expect.
Exactly.
And so we have to accommodate it, and we will. As I said, I think it's slow, it's glacial, as Heather was saying. But the difference in the workplace today versus the workplace when we started is massive. So there's hope. There is.
Right. And what do you see, what policies out of, just because this is a very important topic that I think a lot, it is a huge barrier when it comes to keeping women in the workforce. What have you seen work? What situations, and from the company's perspective, especially larger organizations and startups and smaller businesses, I see more flexibility. But at larger organizations, it seems to still be quite the battle. And with COVID right now, with virtual work coming in, it's an interesting time period.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Kat.
No, go.
Yeah. I would say an interesting model, and not to pipe an advertisement for my current employer, but Salesforce is a remarkable new model in this. I mean, it's one of the especially few larger companies that I've seen that's really got a values-based management system, and it's trust, it's customer success, it's equality, innovation. Those are the 4 primary values, and many companies have values, but they don't walk their talk. So how do they put in place, the communications, the corporate policies, the HR policies that really are meaningful? And a couple of years ago, I think there was an instance at Salesforce that Mark Benioff was challenged on the equality front, and a number of women in the organizations brought forth a case that said, hey, there's not equality here because there's not equal pay. And they looked at the data and they said, you're right, and they changed it. So my experience in being there, a mere 2.5 months now, is that there's an impressive display of walking the talk across those parameters. They're doing a lot around Black Lives Matters now, to helping the intersectional diversity at the company. But the good news is that when you have a company that is a rock star like them, that's doing well based on that, that's attracting talent based on that, that's getting the business, the financial stock market returns with that as part of their DNA, that will be a game changer. So
I'm going to propose a radical idea, because I saw this work. I had my own company for about 7 years, and we had a policy wherein when you had a baby, you could bring the baby to work up to a year, and it was amazing. The impact that had on the mom, who was thrilled to be able to be with her child, right? And so that stress of coming back to work wasn't there. The impact on us as employees was it. It changed the dynamic. It just brought all of the kind of drama down, and we really loved kind of the vibe of the place of having kids around. And then, our clients were totally nonplussed. They were totally cool with it. And there would be moms making presentations in boardrooms with brand new baby strapped to the front of her. And it was perfectly normal. And so, I'm sort of delighted that, COVID, women who working with, for me at PayPal, who had gone out on maternity leave during COVID, and could extend being home with her child, right? And I was really thrilled with that. And would love to advocate for a policy wherein you could bring your child to work. And when they get crunchy and grouchy, you go someplace where you can be. But the women showed up in really powerful ways, just feeling empowered, leaving nothing on the table, not distracted, and joyful that they could be with their child all the time. So, radical idea.
To anyone that would push back and say, did that have an effect on productivity? What would you say to that?
Increased productivity. Increased productivity. Yeah.
It reminds me.
It's really important for that in that front for the women who are for women who have a certain leadership role to give permission by example to do that. So at that point, Allison with her own firm. My last employer, we had one of our key partners of Scandinavia, the Nordic countries, was a woman, Lila Pollock, and she brought her baby everywhere. She did presentations to CEOs and workshops, and her husband was her partner, so they had the tag team of the two of them, but they would just trade off, and the baby was just up there presenting with her. And the beautiful thing about that is it normalizes for everybody that we've got our lives.
Yeah,
I think coming out of COVID, we have a really interesting opportunity to continue this normalizing of lives. I mean, we're all in each other's living rooms. We're having fashion shoots without the makeup. I mean, it's like you get the real you, and it's okay. It's very powerful to show up as your authentic self, and being able to not wait until you're a leader, but be given permission by society to do that, I think allows a lot more powerful unleashing of what our true capabilities are.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, because I know certainly I've had these thoughts before and mindset of, if I can only get to this level of success, then it's acceptable for me to do these things. Okay, then I could have a baby in the next 5 years and I could bring it with me and I could show up and still be seen as professional. But similar to you, Heather, like my mind always saw myself as a work woman, but I know I want a family, but I never thought about walking away from work. But as I've come into my 30s and looking at the age of starting to have kids, I'm finding myself feeling those pressures of like, well, what is that expectation? And I think it's educating society and changing the conversation and normalizing that it's not expected that I have to walk away from everything just to have a child.
No,
it's okay to do both, and it's certainly possible.
It's actually against our programming, right? Like in so many smaller cultures, my ex-partner and I, we lived in the French Caribbean for a long time. It's where his whole family was from. They were all entrepreneurs, right? They all had their own businesses. They had an Arabic background, very strong community. Their kids go everywhere with them, everywhere. And and that's what clients come into the stores and want to develop relationships with the whole family. We consider it old school, but this is actually how we're designed. You're not supposed to have these huge separations that make everybody feel like you have to have these two separate identities.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's a really powerful dialogue that I hope gains more momentum in the next few years.
It truly makes me think that women are more superheroes than I even think before. But
Amen.
I think the broader implication, whether it be parenting or these digressions off of our careers, is we are an amalgam. We are a collective of our experiences. And I think each thing we do adds to our arsenal and our intelligence base and our perspective on the world. And as women, but as people, the more that we can expose ourselves to that and share that and create that diversity within ourselves and among ourselves, the stronger a unit we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So both of you have come from and been through big companies where you're surrounded by men and women. And one thing that we've been curious to talk about is, do you find that it's easier in a culture of more men or more women, or that it's harder to work with women because there is more competition and pressure at the top and there's fewer roles, or has that not been something you've experienced along the way?
Heather, why don't you start this side of the conversation?
Yeah, we had a discussion before this time with you all, and I think it's interesting. I think both Allison and I don't want to speak for her, but we both had the experience that we didn't let any kind of environment, whether it's all male, all female, a mix, stand in the way of what we wanted to do. I think I've had as many fabulous male mentors as I've had female mentors, and I think there are people that are instrumental in helping us, support us, champion us, navigate. And yet it comes down to more of an individual than is it a man or is it a woman. So I think sometimes it's a little dangerous to generalize too much on where the better environment is. That said, I think it's hugely important. If I look back on the high points in my career, the high points are less associated with, gosh, I worked at Apple, or gosh, I worked at McKinsey, or gosh, I worked at, it has much more to do with who were the people that were on my team. What was the communication like? What was that culture like? What were we able, through the combined energy and resource to accomplish that sort of lit the world on fire? So it's that people matter, but sometimes that differentiating alpha, beta, and all, not so much.
Yeah, I would say, in my experience, I have been, for the most part, been in very patriarchal, structures and hierarchies, and was still able to achieve, right? And usually it was because I was the storyteller, right? I was the right brain in a very left brain room. And so I had a unique set of skills that I think set me apart in those kinds of environments. In the context of I think in environments where men and women are working, where it is still really defined by those patriarchal power structures, like we were talking about, and getting success is defined by kind of the things that we were talking about earlier. Women trying to succeed in that environment have to play those games, and that's not when we're our best selves. But when you go to places like, as Heather was saying, like Salesforce, where they are embracing different models of success, right? And they are ensuring equality and inclusion in the workplace, then those that you don't tend to see that as much, right? So I think it's just a matter of time. Again, as especially this generation, Gen Z, millennials entering the workforce, they just come to it with a different set of values, as well as I think they don't bring the biases that came into the workforce during sort of our generation. Those are all diminishing. So it's going to get better and better. Unfortunately, I do think that we have more work to do as women to support other women. I think that is something that we have to do consciously. And so we need to keep the discussion on that going. Yeah, there's work to do, sister.
Yes. Oh yeah, we got lots. I go through my list in the morning. Okay, 10-year plan.
Well, I think it's important also too that it's women supporting women, and it's also men supporting women, and it's changing the dialogue of not saying we want all men out and we want to own the table. It's no, we want to all be able to sit around the table together and feel like we're valued for the different pieces that we bring.
Yeah.
I would say, I think the smart men, the smart and self-confident men get it, that it's really additive to have female perspective and female voice, and it makes their team stronger, makes them a better, whether they're working for a woman or having a woman work for, it's a much stronger combination. I think historically, the women and women thing is that my experience, it's been a kind of a varied march. You know, some women like Allison and all, we were like, we could rule the world. You know, we were young back then, but we felt like we could rule the world. But you know,
Not ruling the world.
collaboration and teamwork. And yet I've run into other women where it's just too competitive. It's like there's an insecurity or something that creeps in, and instead of it being a trust-based, no, we're together, it's a we relationship, it was much more of an I-driven relationship, and there's conflict. And I think we have to figure out how do we grow out of that, because that's an old model that doesn't work, and we can't afford to do that going forward.
Yeah.
Heather, I remember when you and I first spoke, you said something that resonated with me so much, which was that, you know, I can't remember if you said it was about you or it was a story that you had been told of someone close in your circle, but having to show up and decide what isms to strip away to be able to survive and thrive around powerful groups of men and women, depending on the culture. And I just thought, I had such a visual as my character, Lainey, of, you know, as we were doing story work and deciding like she doesn't fit into this world, right? Because she's like all pink and ruffles and high heels, but as the story progresses, she becomes a tech leader. And learning how do you own that and how do you show up authentically as who you are and find the ability to be respected for that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think it's super important. And you know, it's easy to say, be brave, be confident. And yet sometimes that's hard to do until you have enough, you know, mileage under your belt. I think that's where, you know, as people who are more senior, whoever you're working with, whether they be in your organization or not, to really cultivate that sense of confidence and empowerment. And I have a number of gals right now who are in their 30s, and this is very informal, but it's just one I met in an airport. She's from Kenya. She's just finishing MIT. She's in the business world. She spent last summer at BCG. Another worked for me at Singularity, my last company. And these are like super smart rock star young women with very different backgrounds than I have, and also happen to be women of diversity, women of color. And I know they run into a lot of hurdles. And so I've very consciously tried to, I adore them. Yeah, they're amazing individuals. But I've also tried to figure out what is it that I can do that creates a ladder, you know, that gives them a platform to become a CEO, because they should be, because they're brilliant and capable and the world needs their voice.
Yeah, and such a passion of ours through this series is that, you know, a large part of it comes back to education. It's just like, how do you educate young women, and what are the steps along the way once you do graduate, then what? So if someone mentors you or leads you to, this is what you should study, this is what you should look into if this is where your passions are, but then actually diving off into the workforce and networking and knowing, like, put your head down, work hard, and be willing to show up, and then us as a society being able to provide infrastructure to allow that to have a success path.
Yeah.
I remember, here's a story I'm thinking of, you know, as you say that. I back in my 30s when I was having kids, and I was trying to figure that out myself. You know, what's my path here? How do I move from this square to the next square? And I was given a book by Mary Catherine Bateson, who's an anthropologist, daughter of a very famous anthropologist who I'm going to space on her name right now, but you'd know her. And the book is called Composing a Life, possibly the worst written book I've ever read, with all due respect.
Oh, no.
It followed the lives of a number of women. This book is now like 30 years old. But the interesting thing about that book is it blew up the concept of our lives are linear, and you got to climb a corporate ladder the way Allison's my father did. And instead it said, really, we compose a life, we build a life the way we quilt, that you have to early on create different kind of squares, different skill sets, different connections. And then through your life, you put those together in different ways. And that metaphor just really stuck with me. I actually think I think it's even more true today than it was then, because now because of tech disruption, we're in a society where we have to reinvent reinvent ourselves every couple of years.
Yes.
But I think it's a model that whether you're a male or a female, or, it doesn't matter, that's it's both freeing, it's empowering, and it's highly relevant to navigating the world today.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful quote that I am going to paraphrase right now. But essentially, don't attach yourself to an organization, a project, a person, a company. Attach yourself to a mission.
There you go.
And
Amen.
Amen. Exactly. And that's in a lot of the brand work. And as my career has gone, I mean, it's like a giant quantum explosion on all sides. And what always brought all the pieces back, though, was mission. And but I had to actually understand what that was. And then all of a sudden, when that clarity came in, it was like, oh, now I can ski. Now you can have all this fun and go in all these places, because you kind of have something that ties all the pieces together.
Yeah.
So
and you're composing a life.
Right. I liked the title. I don't know if I read the book after your recommendation, but I like the title.
I think we need to rewrite that book.
Yes. Well, before
you worked directly, Allison, I know with West, you were a co-founder there, looking into your background, but have either of you worked directly with another co-founder or partner, and could you speak to that experience versus with working as a partnership a little bit?
Yeah. So I spent 7 years in startup land and really advising founders, right, about how to build markets for these new categories they were creating. It is an incredibly lonely job. It is an incredibly high pressure job. The burden of, I think the burden of ensuring that people can stay employed, that your investors in the venture community are comfortable with where you're headed. There are so many different stakeholders and constituencies that you have to serve in that role. It is extraordinary. It is a very hard, row to hoe. That said, you will learn so much in that capacity. I mean, you wear every hat. The highs and lows are incredibly high and incredibly low. It can be incredibly gratifying, but the stress is real. And I really think that we have to find ways to really help founders, young founders, cope more effectively, more wholly with the challenges that they face, because building a company is the definition of insanity. Starting something from nothing is crazy, and the stress is real. And so lots of empathy. It's a tough journey, but it's it can be incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. This has just flown by, and I think we could talk to you guys for hours and hours, but we know that you do have lives and jobs that you have to get to. But before we go over to questions, are you okay for maybe another 10 minutes? Does that work for you? Is that all right?
I'm good.
Okay. So I wanted us to touch on, especially because with Beta and this whole project that we've been doing, and a topic of very, very important right now that you both touched on, is this need as we move forward in the tech industry, as we design so quickly, to be more conscious of what we're creating and the impact that it has. And you touched on that, and it is a conversation that I'm starting to hear a little bit more about conscious creation and conscious leadership, but it's still far from the dialogue that it is as large as it needs to be. So I would just love to hear both of your perspectives on the future of tech and really what we need to do as designers and as the next generation of leadership to make sure that we build something that's worth it.
Yeah. I have a really strong point of view on this. And actually, Heather and I had a good conversation about this.
So a little darker view of the universe. I think, Alex.
We want to end on a high note. Let's end on a high note.
Okay.
I'll go first so that Heather can carry us out. I think it's a massive problem. I am, as having spent a career in this industry, and I see where we sit today. And we have, 4 leaders sitting in Congress today testifying about why, they deserve to exist in their current forms as opposed to worrying about antitrust sort of issues and competition. And I just think, we aren't thinking enough about the unintended consequences of the technology that we build. It's interesting now in the time of COVID. So at one level, I think we need to be much more conscious about technology and the role that it plays in our lives, and it needs to work in service of us, not the other way around. And I don't think it does to the degree that it needs to today. The other thing is that, and ethics and morals and values and all of that have to be brought into the conversation. And it's not a conversation that is inherently happening in the product development process. It's just not. And so, I think the other issue that we've got is that the venture capital community rewards and funds companies that are going to drive 10x returns.
10 times. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but we're in a situation now where we're not making in this country sufficient quantities of, or any potentially, ventilators. We had to import cotton swabs. We, didn't have all the PPE equipment that we needed to support our healthcare workers. So there are some basic fundamental things that we're missing because we're so entranced by the 10x returns and the future. I believe that technology is important to advancing society, but not at the expense of jobs, health, its society, etc. So I think it requires a really hard look and a big wake up call for the venture community as well as the entrepreneurial community. It's like, what do we need to build? What do we want to build? And how do we help society more fundamentally than we have? I worry about jobs in the future as driverless cars and AI and all of those things start to take hold. And I think we have to consciously think about how we're giving back, how we're supporting the community, supporting our communities much more than we do today. So that I'm disappointed, and I want that to be a rallying cry for this generation.
It's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming.
Heather, give us your glow.
I agree with everything Allison says, and that we do need to be conscious, and we do have a lot of issues. At the same time, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that we're at an incredible time right now. I think there's never been a more interesting time to be in tech and go into tech. I think our opportunities to change industries, to change lives, to solve our gnarliest problems are just vast. When Allison and I started, we were in the personal computer revolution. And now we're in a world where we have multiple simultaneous revolutions that are changing the world. The cloud revolution, AI and data, Bitcoin, artificial reality, virtual reality. I mean, it's just endless. It's really exciting what these things can do to healthcare and education and sustainability and beyond. So The stakes are super high. We need, and I think there's more recognition of, that we need more talent and more diverse talent going into that. I've got to say, I think when you look across the landscape, almost every company is becoming a tech company at this point with the disruption. So the going into tech, the lines are really blurring. So it's, whether you think you're going to tech or going into tech, you are going to be in tech. So figure out how to get smart and play your role there, and ultimately trust that the world needs your brilliance and energy. And if you see white space that's not being addressed, go get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suspect that when we have more diversity, more inclusion, and more women sitting in leadership roles, that these issues, we wouldn't be sitting, in Congress today, having the conversations that we're having. So I think, I'm excited about what this generation can bring to the technology sector.
Yeah, let's innovate and fly and also stay connected to
Amen.
It's your baton.
Yes. I'm not done yet. I'm just letting you know, I'm not done yet. But the point is,
we don't want
we need more of you.
Well, I believe we have 2 questions from our audience, if we want to look at those real quick. Allison, I did a quick peek at your LinkedIn and see you worked at IBM for a few years. How did that experience shape the rest of your career?
It was a really important one. It was foundational. It was interesting because, to Heather's point, it was at a time when, e-zines and browsers, et cetera, were kind of taking over the landscape. And the internet was just starting to so I'm really dating myself. I was 10. I keep telling everybody I was 10 at the time. But the opportunity to help a company the size of IBM. IBM had no idea. It was a mainframe company. Had no idea how it was going to figure out how to, what role it had to play in the internet era. And so I got together with this R&D, IBM fellow, to talk about and think about what the internet could mean for IBM. And it's just the two of us really who came up with this concept of what became e-business. We're talking about the biggest transformation of business in the history of all time, right? With wiring everything out from your customer, to your customers, to your back end, rewiring it for the internet age. And so it was a huge opportunity for IBM. IBM had a huge role to play in that. And after we sort of framed up that narrative, the company all went in that direction. The services business was built to support companies, really helping them with that transformation. So here I was, this little media relations manager, early in my career at this big giant company called IBM, but had the ability to see, a way forward, an opportunity, a place for that company in what was one of the biggest, technology shifts in history. So it was just, it says that good ideas can come from anywhere, that they can, that you need to listen to people at all levels of the organization. And, tiny little teams can have, massive impact. So it was hugely formative for me. Had I not had that experience, I don't know that I would have had the career that I've had. It gave me courage. It gave me bravery. And I had to face down at a super young age, men who would say, "Are you sure about this? Because I'm going to get up on stage now and have this conversation, and I could, I could lose my job on this." And I said, "I'll bet my job on this." So I was just a kid, but I felt, so confident in where I stood that I was able to bring, help bring a company along. It was pretty interesting. It was a fascinating journey. So yeah, it was very formative.
Amazing. All right, we have one last question. You talked about some of your early challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated workplace. What advice would you give women on how to handle conflict in a male-dominated work environment without having to compromise too much?
Yeah.
You want to go first? You go.
This is a really good question. I have recollection. This is not common. This is sort of an extreme example of being in situations where, let me just call out. I have recollection of being in a meeting room with Steve Jobs and his 8 lieutenants. And Steve, as Allison can attest, she worked with him way more than I did, can be a fairly intimidating and quite vocal character. And I remember prepping myself going into that meeting, and I was not an employee of his at this particular meeting. I was trying to do a deal with Apple, and initially feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know that I have the power base of the ground going into this meeting, that I'm really prepared. And then I realized that I had really, you have to find the bottom of the pool. There was no place to fall. There was nothing to lose. And so going in with sort of that sense of, I have everything to gain and nothing to lose, and I'm just going to hold my peace and listen carefully and not react fast, gives you a certain kind of control of your own dashboard. So I think that the downside of being women is we tend to discount ourselves. We tend to be a little maybe too emotional sometimes, a little too reactive sometimes. So keeping the cool, keeping the calm, and not to be cliche, but like holding your power close can give you a really strong platform to move from.
Yeah, I would say I was not always the best example at this. I'm by nature shy and introverted and get super uncomfortable in those situations where you're getting talked over or someone runs with your idea, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was really tricky. I would have to, go home, recharge, think, come back in with a perspective and a way of moving the ball forward in a way that I thought was right. But I think it was super hard. I can't say that I was a genius role model at it. I always felt like lead with the work. It's the quality of the work, and you will persevere and you will shine by virtue of the work. So let the work speak for itself. I was not the most vocal person in the room. There are times when I did stare them down and I say, I'll bet my job. But when you're sitting next to Steve Jobs every day for every Wednesday for 7 years, defending your work, it's intense, and you have to gird yourself. There are things that we can do as women to help other women in those circumstances, which is when that thing happens, right? Where, the guy in the room runs with the story and it's his idea and it was actually originated by the woman in the room, one of the women in the room. Remind people where the idea came from. There are things that we can do to help each other. And I think in some cases, that's the way we should do it, is just like when we see somebody, getting stepped on, raise your hand. And I do think that we've got to be brave about, maybe not in the moment, but afterwards saying, hey, that didn't feel good. That wasn't really appropriate. Calling it not in that moment, but afterwards.
Changing the consciousness.
Changing the consciousness.
Cultivating that tribe is really important. Figuring out how, not just among women, but among men, creating that network, broader network outside your company, but also network within your teams so that you're not going in as a lone voice. You've got a team at your back.
Yeah.
It's so important. I think about a friend of mine, they work in a writing room and her voice will often get passed over. She'll be speaking, give an idea, and then it'll be said by one of the men writers in the room, and they'll take it. And it took her a while to get it, to be like, wait, I said that three times. And again, that's part, sometimes for women, it's like, it took me a while to understand that sometimes I'm not being heard because literally I'm just not being heard. But I think that there's a problem with the idea itself. But she had her male partner, her male writing partner, who started to notice it. And she was like, is this happening? And he's like, yeah. And then he started to bring it up in the writer's room. And it helped her because she didn't want to cause conflict. So it's hard to self-advocate. It's hard to stand up in those situations when nobody else acknowledges or supports you behind it. Because then you seem like the one who's causing a problem.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say on that note, and I think it's important for all of us to consider, is that if there's a pattern that it's just too hard with too many different, sometimes you have to kind of take a look and is that a signal? Is it maybe this isn't the right road? We all have things that we try to build or do, or organizations that we are in where either the project that we're on, the team that we're on, the boss that we have, whatever, that it's not working. That it's just, and it's not a failure. There's no such, I don't believe there's any such thing as true failures, but there are things that just don't bloody work. And sometimes it's good to just take inventory of that and figure out, how do I pivot and find an avenue that does different, where I've got wind at my back instead of wind in my face.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
Be fearless, be confident, do good work, and show up.
Right? You're going to fall and stumble a million times, but that's okay.
Yeah. And don't feel like you have to have the answers in every moment. Like, you can work it out over time. You don't have to, pound the table in the room.
Yeah.
It's not comfortable for us. So, yeah.
Well, Heather, Allison, I cannot thank you enough.
We're just so
thank you guys.
Awed and grateful.
So fun to share our stories.
Yeah. Love it.
Thank
Love
you.
it. You guys keep going, doing what you're doing. It's amazing. Excited for you. Excited for the folks who are listening in on the phone. Good times ahead, you guys. Just keep at it. Right.
Thank you. And good luck to both of you with everything moving forward, and stay safe and healthy.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, ladies. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one.
So long. Bye.
All right, Beta audience. That was incredible. I hope you learned as much as we did. I'm like, I can't believe how fast it goes.
I know. I was watching the time, but that's when we have some incredible guests here. Incredible guests. I'm very lucky. All right.
Well, I'm Adriana, actor, writer, producer. You can find everything about me at adrianaleonard.com.
And I'm Carly Marcel. I'm a speaker, a media producer, and the founder of the Machi Teen Network, a home for change agents to empower them to become unstoppable, thriving humanity leaders. You can find out more on my website, carlymarcel.com.
Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to our next Beta Real Talks with you on Wednesday next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good one.